and welcome to another episode of The Focal Thought. My guest today is Shayne Case. How are you, Shayne?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good, good. Glad to have you on the show. And Shayne, you are a mother, healer, writer, medicine maker, and enrolled member of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe. And you come from southwestern Germany, right?
That's correct, yes.
Great. And the ancestry that you come from is the Lakota ancestry. And I believe the Lakota is one of two tribes, Lakota and Dakota. And it's also related to the Sioux tribe, right? So it's one of the subsects of the Sioux tribe.
Yeah, actually, there's three, Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota, which is the sort of explanation of our language. And altogether, we're the Sioux Nation. But oftentimes we refer to our, our groupings by our language. So yes, my family's from the Lakota, and our band is the Minnekoju, which translates to plants by the water.
Okay, and how much, coming from southwestern Germany, how much access do you have to your heritage and your ancestry from there? Because I mean, from what I know, the Dakota is, like North Dakota and South Dakota in the U.S., right?
Right. As a child, I was born in Germany, and as a child, we came back and forth and lived, in my father's area and land, which is South Dakota area, Eagle Butte, South Dakota, which is where he grew up. And the access was really just familial visits. And then as an adult, I now live in the US, and I travel to the reservation quite often when I can. COVID has definitely changed that, but generally, it's hard to be away from that landscape, but I try to touch base as often as I can.
Sure. And what's it like when you do go to the reservation? What are the feelings like there?
Yeah, for me, it's such a deep feeling that I can only say is like, oh, this is probably my ancestral blood, because the moment I am in that area, I feel like, oh, this is home, even though, being born and not necessarily making my home on the reservation for long periods of time, my whole body feels relaxed, which is very contrary to what the social scene is like there. Eagle Butte has, all the reservations really have a lot of effect of colonization and cultural genocide and oppression and trauma. There's a lot of drug and alcohol abuse. That there's a huge, I think, consciousness of how to heal the transgenerational trauma there. But the land, it always heals me. It always makes me feel like, oh, this is my family. The trees and the river and the plants. I feel most at home when I'm there. And then my relations, my cousins and my auntie and my grandma, they're also part of that experience for me. It's not like anything else that I ever experienced outside of the reservation. It's just such a different lifestyle, and there's just so much complexity. It's both. It's like the ease of family and familiarity and a sense of belonging at the same time of the complexities of the traumas and the wounds and the history in what's happened with my family. It's also there, so it's both.
Sure. And I imagine it's still prevalent, right? Like the trauma, like you're saying.
Yes.
You have to sort of go on with life, but at the same time this is right in front of you, right?
Oh, absolutely. There is, I think a lot of the way that I focus my work with the plants, and, maybe it's also the lens in which I live my whole life, is an understanding that we all carry these stories of our ancestors in our bodies, and we also get to make some choices that bring healing. And a lot of that is about access. It's a lot about providing opportunities for awareness and connection. And, you know, when I visit my family and do my work on tribal land, I am often, you know, in those worlds of like, okay, like, there's like true poverty here. And I have to focus too on the abundance of our indigenous blood and spirit and ability to connect. So it's about both holding the truth of this current trauma and believing in, seeing, and amplifying the greatness also. And I don't mean that in an egoic way, but I mean it in the amplitude of this wisdom of our ancient blood that can prevail and does. And so, yeah, it is true. There's active trauma and transgenerational trauma. And I do feel quite lucky. My brother and I are the first generation of my father's lineage to not go to residential schools, and to be free from that particular trauma, which I know we're not totally free because, you know, our father is so wounded in that way and brings that energy into our lives. But my brother and I have had an opportunity to have access to a path, educational wise, that allows us to come back and to do work, to uplift, and to create opportunities of healing for those family members that are still there.
And it's good to see that hopefully, you know, with your generation and generations going forward, there should be a change, you know, for the better.
Yeah.
Because with ancestral trauma, you know, things that are hidden in the DNA and the spirit, things like that, it's not impossible, but it's tough to get out of initially.
Oh yeah.
And you know, from what I know, like the Lakota culture, you'll have had considerable people like, you know, Sitting Bull, Red Cloud, Billy Mills, who fought against, you know, the U.S. government. And so it's not that, you know, Lakota were sort of victims. They actually fought as well, right? They weren't just sitting passively. So there's that also, that's built into it, right?
We have warrior spirit.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's just the Lakota. I think that probably all indigenous people around the world, you know, would stand up to something that was taking away their rights to their families, their practices, their land. It just depends on, you know, how much people, and, you know, there's so many circumstances. But I mean, I think that's true of all humanity. It's like if there is a threat to your basic rights, as a human to exist, you're going to fight. I think it's just more recorded. You know, we definitely have some superstars in our Lakota history, but I do think that there are equally as brave and courageous advocates for human rights in indigenous stories everywhere.
Yes, and you know, you did mention plants before, which I really wanted to ask you about, you know, in this episode today. So indigenous, you know, cultures, they've got a long history that goes hand in hand, you know, with the culture, from what I see, with sort of the use of medicine. And whereas the West, you know, a lot of the medicine is artificial, pharmaceutical, synthetic. The indigenous cultures, they have a different approach to the medicines they use. You know, much like the early Ayurvedic, or, you know, the Chinese medicines as well. It's their own take on it, where they're using sort of local plants to help with healing. And then also, you know, plant medicines to get into sort of like the spirit world. And, you know, talking with spirits, you know, gaining strength and wisdom from the spirits. What are your earliest memories of such use of this medicine, you know, within your family or the culture that you have?
Oh yeah, it's probably one of my favorite things to talk about, you know, because it's probably also my happiest memories as a child, were, you know, my relationships with the plants. So my earliest memory is, in fact, my memories of plant medicine. And it's really, it's less about like, oh, this plant, is used to heal your stomach ache. It's not, I think in some ways that is such a myopic point of view. And maybe that is like the Western culture of plant equals symptom healing, but it's more of this cultivation of a relationship to really truly understand what is the eldership of that plant. It's more than, oh, this medicinal constituent has this effect in my body, but it's a spiritual relationship that, you can actually have that brings in the healing to all aspects of the self, whether it be something physical or mental or emotional, spiritual. And so as a child, I was left alone to my own devices much of the time. And this was also true in Germany and also in the US. And when I spent time in South Dakota and North Dakota, I would roam the prairie and the forests and have deep conversations with the plants and the trees and listen. I would listen with my whole heart. And I don't even know how to say that in adult terms, but as a child, nobody told me that you couldn't have a full conversation with a tree or a plant. And so I just assumed that this was normal. This is what we do. And they would tell me, this is, we're going to make this particular medicine. And, a lot of it was play. I would make mud pies, but with direction from like spirit and, concoctions of all sorts. And some of them probably were poisonous and, some of them maybe tasted like dirt, but I still practiced. And I think because I was allowed and had the permission from my ancestors to enter into this apothecary of our earth and listen to the plants, it helps me, and it helped me as I developed and really learned the medicine ways to understand that, oh, it really is this like open innocence that anybody could have if they gave themselves the permission first to have that playfulness of like, well, what would it be like if I just walked out and I don't know the name of that tree or that plant, but I just said, hey, how's it going? And just to see, what would happen. And, I do think that those early times of being a feral child in the wild gave me so much opportunity to believe in and to trust that the medicine way is really about listening to our ancestors, our plant ancestors, and they tell us, exactly what we need to help support or to purge or to heal.
Wow. So when you say listening, is it a
Yes.
sort of like a form of meditation, or what does that look like, that process,
I think
or sound
maybe it's
like?
a form of active meditation. It's like a meditation with an expectation. I think it's a little bit different than just clearing the mind. That's the start, is to clear expectations and get out of your way. Because I think what I hear anyway from my students, and I certainly experience this too, is that there are times when self-doubt comes in and like, oh, I'm making this up, and then you can't hear. But listening to the plants, I think it requires a kind of expectation that when you say, hi, how are you, that you're actually going to hear something back. And it takes time, I think, to unblock whatever it is that, creates that boundary between you hearing the plant. But I think over time, it gets less and less if you just keep on saying, hi, how are you? Like, what offerings do you have? Here are my offerings, to you. And eventually the expectation is that you're going to hear what the plant has to say. Maybe it's a song or maybe it's some words, but after working with many people who come for one-on-one work with me or through my school, I start to see that it doesn't matter, where you came from or your beliefs or your heritage or your culture, that giving that practice that everybody does actually have the ability to listen to what the plants have to say, and the plants always do talk to the people. At first I was like, I don't know, maybe this is just me, but no, everybody got something, by the end of our time together, everybody was listening and talking to their trees or their plants.
And so then there is a two-way communication happening between the person and the plant.
Absolutely.
Wow. And then I imagine, in the early days, it wasn't just plants. I'm sure, people were communicating with nature as well, the mountains,
Yeah.
you say, or the earth.
Yeah. Well, we have, a saying that, which is, all my relations. And when we say that, we don't mean all my human relations. We really mean all that is, all that is, we are related, and we gain relationship, we gain wisdom and, medicine and challenges by understanding that, as much as I think the mental mind wants to put us at the hierarchy, that we're not, we're in a hoop with all things. And so, yeah, we use rocks, gemstones, the mineral people, in our practices. We all often call upon, the birds and the water animals, just say that these are my cousins, the whales. And so, yeah, it's not just plants, it's all creation, it's all beingness, which, when there is that lens of viewing the world in that way, it makes it so much easier to connect and to love and to have understanding for all humanity, because you're not so limited to think that, this is the only way I can experience relationship. But, the whole world is an opportunity for me to feel loved and seen and supported, and to, to gain reparenting if that's what you need, or eldership if that's what you need.
Sure. And by that philosophy, there can be no enemy, right? If everything is sort of related, and there's right. Like reverence and respect for it.
Yes. Of course, I think we see that. I'm watching crows right now fight over a last nugget of nourishment from some tree. And I think that there is challenge. We have conflict, but if we start to see that this is also our relation, we bring a gentler love to that conflict, so that we're not just creating an idea of separation. I think when we create too many ideas of separation and we embody philosophies of separation, that's when we really get into trouble and create suffering.
Sure. No, that's a good point. With the plants you're using, so I imagine as medicine you're using it to cure common ailments such as maybe colds, coughs, fevers, things like that.
Well, that's a start. That's a start for sure. Definitely. Yeah. All my remedies are plant remedies, but in my practice, I started to realize after, years of kind of treating people on that level, that there was something deeper inside of them that they were really truly asking for help with. And those things, had to do with challenges, whether they be wounds from their early childhood or patterns from their ancestry or whatever suffering that they felt inside. And so I switched to using primarily plant spirit medicine in my practice, which means that I'm working with the essential energy, the spirit of the plant that's delivered to them through the water of the plant, which is, I think if, it's not like, more of this, potency of this plant is going to cure you. It's more like, oh, the essence, it's just like the water of this plant. It actually has the capacity to meet these deeper places in your emotional body, right? Water, emotion, to meet you in your emotional body, to shift these patterns that have caused suffering. And so I do a lot of work now with the plant spirit medicine.
Wow. So what's an example of that? So is the plant sort of soaking in water and then the person drinks the water, or how does that work?
Yeah. Oh, the preparations. So it depends on the plant. It's really what the plant says. When I make medicine, I don't go out with an idea of like, okay, I have, these clients and, they're suffering from isolation because of quarantine. They're really depressed, like this plant's going to heal that. What I do is I go out to, wherever I'm going to make medicine, I have this prayer in my heart and I talk to the trees like they're my counsel, or the elders like my grandparents, and they say, I've been talking to my community and they're hurting and I don't know what they need beyond, like somebody to come and visit them or whatever. I don't know what medicine it is that they need, but I know that you have some suggestions, and I wait until I hear like, oh, go over there. Go over there. And so I might, meet like, oh, here's the Douglas fir tree. And I'll know because I feel drawn towards that plant, that tree. And then I'll ask the plant. I'm like, I really, want to know, like, do you have something for us? This is what's happening in the community. What part of you are you offering for this medicine? And it might be something like, yes, you need this part of the root and this is how you prepare it. But generally, I have a bowl of water. I collect the part of the plant and, a lot of times it's the flower. That is where a lot of the essence of the plant is. With trees, it might be different. I put it in the water for a period of time, a couple of hours. I wait until that water is potentized. Usually there's like little bubbles there. I collect the water. I put it in some type of container. I use, different things to preserve it. Sometimes it's alcohol based. Sometimes it's glycerin. Sometimes it's vinegar. It just depends. And that water with the preserved, other element in it, so it doesn't go funky, gets put into little bottles. And then I give them to my community, either through my work or I donate so much plant medicine to Indigenous people all around the nation that asks for it. And I do believe that Indigenous medicine for Indigenous people is like the way, instead of hitting them over the head with a lot of pills, right?
Yeah.
And, so it goes like that. And I know that it's a very different approach to medicine making than the Western model. I mean, I was trained in the clinical herbalism on the Western model, and I know it's very particular. There's lots of rules. It's, it's not only, I think there is a big part of it that's intuitive, but there is like a structure and it's intellectual and you have to know each plant. And I do know those things, I know them from my upbringing. I know them from school, but I also know that that's not always the helper. The helper is going to be coming from that tree that's 5,000 years old and knows a lot more than I do. But if I trust that, and then make that medicine and give that medicine to people, I mean, it's amazing to see what happens. There's shifts. I mean, I just got off the phone with some clients this afternoon and they were like, oh, that medicine that you sent me, like something happened and then I was feeling this for the whole time. It's amazing to me that something as simple as the spirit of this plant offering its medicine through water, water is absorbing it. It could make such fundamental shifts and changes in somebody's whole entire foundational belief system. I mean, that's the power That's the power of working in a philosophy of all is related, all is connected, that we don't have to heal alone and isolated.
Wow. So when you're actually using the water, you're drawing out the essence of the plant, and by the essence you mean the spirit of the plant, which is the soul of the plant. Because I'm reminded of like when you make sort of like a soup, and if you use like a bone, you're sort of drawing out the nutrients and the minerals of the bone into the water.
Right.
So here you're sort of capturing that, from the plant, but you're saying the actual spirit of the plant is also passed on.
Yeah, water is a great, it's a great holder of, there's so many things I can say about water in itself. We
energy.
Also have it's energy in itself. But when using it as a menstruum or as a carrier of that plant's essential energy, spirit, the water is actually holding that map. It's holding that matrix. And when then we take that into our bodies, we're very fluid. We have this fluidity of changeability in our humanness. It's part of what makes us human. But when we recognize that particular pattern of this plant that is provided, like, oh, this is the place of balance, then our awareness, it says, oh, here is the place of anchor. Here is the place of balance. And then our conscious, it's working on a spiritual, emotional level. Then our conscious mind, our mental mind, can make those awarenesses and shifts. And I think when we work in this particular way, we have to go through the back door. We can't always use the intellect and the physical body towards healing. We have to actually lean into the trust that something greater than, the physicality of medicine, but the spirituality of medicine is holding us.
Wow. Would you say then, like, say, for example, humans have a soul, and then, the plants have a soul/spirit, but then it's at the base end, it's all coming from the same source, right?
Yeah, I think we're, I think that, when I say we're all connected, it doesn't mean we're all individuals connected by something only. I think, we have a presentation, a form, but I think that the reason we're connected is that we've never been separate.
Wow. So when we're drawing from this plant energy, it's really the same energy that's interrelated to all of us.
Right. Exactly.
Wow. Even like you mentioned water, and people know the work of Dr. Emoto, freezing his water crystals and, playing music to them and seeing the structures, some of them very symmetrical, some of them distorted. And then I've heard of people sort of, placing water in the corner of the house, I think with some vinegar. And if the water turns dark, you can see it's captured negative energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So water, you're right, is a whole different topic altogether for the powers that it has.
Yes, there's another, there's a well-known saying, water is life. And, my lineage, the Minnekoju, plants by the water, it's telling you about a relationship of life that can never be separate from water. And I often tell my young son when he's in foul mood and, saying all the negative things that happened in school, and I say, oh, watch out for the water in your body. Are you telling your water to be in this way that makes you feel bad? Or of course we can vent and have all this, what happened in the day, but also tend to the water in yourself. Make sure that you're also saying good things about, maybe you're grateful that I made you this great lunch and you had that lunch, or you had a good time on the playground or whatever, to tend to the water in your body, because it does change, and that water influences your well-being physically, emotionally, and certainly it is a spiritual practice.
Wow, and we are, 70% water, right? So you're right. It is capturing that energy and it's affecting us.
Right.
Where do you see, the work that your culture has done with plant-based medicines and with its relationship with nature. Do you see it sort of getting into the Western world as an example more and more every day, like being blended in or implemented? Or
I mean, I hope so. I think that I think one part of it is maybe the Western world having to shift a paradigm, and that paradigm is one of the patriarchy and hierarchies, and starting to understand what it really means to be connected, and also maybe healing. It's an individual, but collectively too, like healing their own indigeneity, because everybody comes from like indigenous practices. It might just be 2,000 years ago, or in my case, it's I come from indigenous practices right now.
Yeah.
And I think as people have this idea of like, oh, I do have rituals and I do have a connection with plant medicine. Of course you do. Like the technology that invents synthetic foods and medicines is relatively new. And so, of course, everybody comes from a relationship with plants, and not just plants, but seasons and stars, and, these ways of really being in relationship to all things. And I do think that paradigm shift is possible. If we can have a paradigm shift that created, cell phones and pharmaceuticals, then we can have a paradigm shift that also brings us back into rhythm and balance with our natural world.
Yes, and when I say a Western world, I don't mean to glorify it as the one and only world, because it wasn't always the Western world. It's not going to be always the Western world. There's history has shown us of great civilizations that have risen and fallen. I'm not sure which one's coming up next. But, at the moment, it does seem to be the dominant sort of structure, in some cases for now, and the popular sort of form for now. And going forward with new generations coming up, they have the power to decide which way to take it, right? And sort of shed the trauma of the past, and build on sort of new goals and visions for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of hope for that. I mean, I do see, some even, young ones that I am in contact with surprise me with the wisdom that they come to this planet with, and a real knowing of connection, regardless of their cultural heritage or the conditioning of their families. They know how to get back into connection, and they're not afraid, and that gives me a lot of hope. I think that there is a consciousness here that is maybe more willing to step outside of the suffering of separation and give it a go and see, like, what does it mean? What does it mean that I can walk outside of my urban house, find a tree that some planter planted there, probably for decoration or air pollution, and actually have a conversation and get medicine from it, to feel met and to feel like, oh, I had this pain or this issue or whatever, and I have more insight on what I need to heal it. I mean, that is available to everybody. And I do think that I am hopeful about the consciousness and where we're going. We want to live.
We
want to live mostly.
And like Alan Watts says also, you've got good and evil, and both are sort of in this eternal dance. And if you didn't have that sort of eternal dance, there wouldn't be any movement, right?
Right.
If it was just one in dominance, then things would be sort of flatlined and
inert.
Yeah, exactly. So, but hopefully, like you're saying, good is the one that does prevail, and I think it almost always does. And that's the direction that everyone's heading towards. But thanks again for coming on the episode and speaking with us today.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And if people want to find out more about your work or get a hold of you, where's the best place for them to reach you?
Yeah, I have all my contact information and offerings is on my website. And that website, I'll give it to you. It's www.shaynecase, SHAYNECASE .com.
.com.
So yeah, ShayneCase.com.
Sure. And I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And thanks very much again, Shayne. And I wish you the best.
Thank you so much. Take care.